Hello everyone, my name is Ryan Baxter and I'm a developer advocate for Codename Bluemix. And as you're all probably aware of now, Bluemix is IBM's new platform as a service offering. It is based on an open source project called Cloud Foundry and it is currently in open beta. So what that means is basically anyone can join the beta. You just need to sign up and request access. And once you're granted access to the beta, the first thing everyone's probably going to do is try to log in to Bluemix and explore what the UI looks like. So I figured I'd give everyone a quick tutorial of the Bluemix UI and show you some of the functionality and features that you can expect to see when you first log into Bluemix. So once you've been approved for the beta, you just go to bluemix.net and click the login button. And then you just need to log in with your IBM ID and password. And after you log in, you'll be brought to the dashboard. Now the dashboard shows you kind of an overall picture of what's happening with all the applications and all the services that you're using within Bluemix. So the first thing you'll notice here is you probably won't, the first time you're logging, you probably won't have any applications, you won't have any services, but I have a couple of applications already deployed to Bluemix and a few services that I'm using. One of the cool things is that you get a very quick overview of where you're at as regards to the different limits that are imposed with your account on Bluemix. So in the beta, everything's pretty much the same. Everyone gets 8 GB of memory. You can use up to 20 services. You can deploy however many apps you want, but you can't exceed those limits. But you get some nice diagrams or graphics of how much you're using at this current time. So you can see I'm using about 2.6 gigabytes of memory out of 8, and I'm using 3 services out of 20. The middle graphic is telling me the state of all my applications, the health of my applications. So in my case, all my applications are up and running, so everything's nice and green. The 4 squares underneath this checkbox here basically represent the 4 different applications that I have running. If one of the applications was to not be running or to be in a bad state for some reason, then one of these boxes would be red, and there'd be a big red X through the middle of this circle here. Basically telling me, hey, there's something wrong with one of your applications. Maybe it's expected, maybe it's not expected, but kind of gives you a nice heads up. The other thing you're going to notice immediately is that there's going to be this menu over to the left-hand side of the UI. And you can see that it breaks it down into 3 different categories here. So there's all, which is the view we're looking at right now, which displays all of the applications and all my services I have running. But in some cases, if you have a lot of applications or you have a lot of services, this can be a little overwhelming. So you can break things down by, hey, just show me the applications or just show me the services if I want. The other thing is that there's this big blue box at the top here and with the word dev in it. And this is basically displaying the current space I'm looking at. You can click on it to see a drop down of all the other spaces for your organization. So what are spaces and what is an organization in Bluemix terms? So an organization is kind of a structural unit for a group of people and apps. So for example, I can create organizations for my sales team, or for my developer team, or for my my outreach team, or for my IT team, right? And all of my sales related applications will go in my sales organization, and I'll add all the people related to creating those sales applications to that organization, and everything that's related to for IT applications, I can create an IT organization, add everyone that's related to the IT apps to that organization. So it's a way of dividing the applications and people that are working on those applications in Bluemix. In a given organization, you may have multiple spaces. And a common use for spaces is kind of breaking down different environments. So it's very common in an agile environment to have a developer version of the application running, a staging version of the application running, and a production version of the application running. So obviously the production version of the application is what all your customers and everyone is using. It's fairly stable, it has little problems, and the staging A staging application may be something that's maybe a little bit less stable. It's getting ready to be moved to production, has the next set of features that you're going to launch, stuff like that. And a development version is cutting edge stuff, cutting edge code, something like that. So it's very common to create spaces for those different classes of applications, we'll call them, so that I can have a development space where all my development applications are running, development versions of my applications. And this is probably something where if you're working in agile development where there's builds happening multiple times a day, and those builds result in deployments to Bluemix of the code straight from Trunk, for example, right? So it could be bugs in it. It's the latest and greatest stuff, and so forth. Same with the staging and production environment. The staging and production spaces will have all my stage applications where there's probably testing happening, verification, stuff like that, and production has all my production applications running in them. You can manage your spaces, you can create new spaces, you can create new organizations, you can delete spaces, you can add people to different organizations and spaces, all from the Bluemix UI, just by clicking on either the manage organizations up here or the manage spaces here. Once you get to the manage organizations, you can then manage the spaces for those different organizations here. Next thing you're probably going to look to is the catalog. And the catalog is pretty much where all the fun stuff is anyways. The catalog contains three main things. It contains boilerplates, it contains runtimes, and it contains services. So boilerplates are, the getting started applications, right? So if I want to get started building a Node.js application, I might choose the Node.js web starter, and it kind of gives me a base application to get started with and to build from. Runtimes are the different languages we support. You can see there's 4 listed here: Liberty for Java, Node, Ruby on Rails, and Ruby Sinatra. But that's not all the languages we support. We support a wide variety of languages in addition to these, including PHP, Python, Go, for example. All of these languages are supported, but they're supported by community, what's called community build packs. And I'm not going to go into community build packs today and what they are, but just know that just because you see these 4 languages here doesn't mean that these are the only 4 languages or runtimes that Bluemix support. We support a large number more languages than you see here. They're just not listed. The services are either infrastructure-related services or functionality that you want to add to your application that you wouldn't want to have to manage yourself, because being a platform as a service is all about not having to manage the infrastructure, or very easily adding functionality to your applications in a very short period of time. So for example, if I wanted to add a database to my application, I need a database for my application to store data, I can pick from one of the databases that are here as services. So there's a Mongo one, there's a MySQL one. For example, you can choose from and easily add these to your application to use within your app. There's also, for example, this push notification. So if I needed to push notifications to mobile devices, and I didn't want to build all that code myself, I can use this push notification service, add it to my application, and I can easily start pushing or using push notifications from my application. So just as a sample to get started here, let's pick the Java DB web starter, for example. I'll click on this, and it tells me a little bit about the web starter and what it does. You can see it uses the Liberty runtime and uses a SQL database. So let me click Create Application. I'm going to put it in my dev space. I'm going to call it Java DB Starter, and click Create. And what this is basically going to do is going to bring me back to the dashboard, and it will start to provision the application in Bluemix. So you can see that now I have this red circle with an X in it. Don't be alarmed. It doesn't mean that the provisioning failed or anything. It just means the application isn't running yet. It's provisioning itself and starting the application up. So as things change with the provisioning of the application, this nice drop down here will give me a nice update of what's happening. So we can see that the application was created and now it's staging. And as things change with the application, we'll see that new things show up here. So we can see that the instances are now starting, So now we're starting all the instances in Bluemix. And finally, the last stage will be that the application is up and running. And once that happens, we'll see that everything turns green and we're good to go, right? So now we can go and access the application. So if I close this, we can see that I can click on the application here, and that brings me to a nice overview of what's happening here. You can see the application name, the URL, services it's using, the runtime, etc. So if I click on the Liberty for Java runtime here, it'll give me a little bit more details. I can see how many instances are running, how much memory each instance is using. If I want to increase the number of instances that are using, let's say I want to bring it up to 10, the memory quota on the side will automatically adjust and show me how much memory I have left after doing that. So you can see that if I brought it up to 10, I would only have 384 megs left. If I went to 11, I'd be over my memory limit, so I couldn't do that. I'm not going to change the number of instances right now. I can also change the memory each instance is using, and same here, if I change the memory quota on the right there will update as I change it. I can see statistics about each instance that's running here, so I can see how much CPU is using, the memory it's using. This is obviously good for debugging. At the bottom is probably one of the more important things, and this is environment variables. And the reason this is important is because this VCAP services environment variable contains all the details about the services that are bound to your application. So like I said before, when we looked at the Java DB web starter, it had a SQL database service that was going to be bound to it. And this is the information about this SQL database server. So this contains all the information that I'm going to need within my application in order to connect to that database. So what I would do in my code is then access this environment variable, pull out the information I need, and then I can start talking to this database. So this is a very important piece of information for you to keep track of and to understand what it does. And we'll talk more about that obviously when we start talking about writing code that are using services. The other important thing here is the files and logs. So this can the most important thing here is the logs folder. So I can go in here and see what's happening in the logs for debugging purposes. If there was any errors, it would show up in the standard error log. The standard out contains everything that's printed out to standard out. You can see this is just information about the application, the runtime starting, actually Liberty starting in this case. I can download the log file, so I can just click the button here and download the log file if I want to analyze it further outside of the browser. So let's head back to the catalog and say, I wanted to add another service to my application. Maybe I wanted to add the Redis service, for example, to my application. How would I do that? I can click on the Redis service, and I can click Add to Application, and I'll select a space again here. I'll pick my dev space, and let's just add it to the Java DB starter the web application that I just created. I don't have to associate with an application. I can choose Do Not Associate and create the application of the service, but that won't really do anything until it's added to something. So let's pick the Java DB web starter and click Create, and that automatically adds the service to my application. You can see now we have the Redis service here, and it shows up down here as well. And if I go back to my runtime and check out the VCAP services, we'll now see that the Redis service details are now here too available to my application. So my application code can now take advantage of this Redis service, and that's how easy it is to add a service or a piece of functionality to your application. So if I go back to the overview here, one last thing I'd like to point out is whenever you create an application from the catalog or a service from the catalog, there's this usually a guide associated with it. This is the Getting Started guide, so it tells you all the information you need to do to get started with the application. Basically from installing the command line tool, downloading all the code for the application, extracting it, modifying it, and then pushing it back to Bluemix and adding your updates. We're not going to do that today. We'll do that in a future video, but I just wanted to point out that this guide is right here available to this sidebar, and you can get to it pretty easily by clicking on the drop-down. The last thing I like to point out is the docs here. So docs is probably the single most important part of the UI. It has all information for getting started. It has tutorials. It has information about runtimes and services. has information about deploying applications, troubleshooting, points you to places where you can go to get help. It's a really, really good resource for using Bluemix and everything you want to get started. So I suggest you go and read through the documentation before you do anything else, and some great stuff here to get started.